Regardless of your skill level on guitar, the concept we're covering today is going to ensure you never again struggle with your solos. And trust me, this is one we all easily dismiss, sometimes whether we realize it or not. Long story short, we all need to simplify in order to sound better. Let me explain what I mean. So many of us rely on scales to solo, and that makes perfect sense. We want to be able to know where the notes are that are in key, and a scale shows us those. However, almost without fail, people tend to use the entire scale because using more notes should sound better, right? Just because a scale has defined where all the notes are in a given key doesn't mean you need to incorporate all of them in your solos. And honestly, when we do that, many times we can sound less melodic, more robotic, and maybe just flat out scalar. Yes, the scale does show us the available notes to choose from. However, we need to practice limiting what we play, and I simply call this limitation practice. Let me tell you a quick story of where I discovered this. It's about 20 years ago, I hosted a guitar workshop where Ron Bumblefoot Thal was one of the guest instructors. He was on stage and working with students individually, helping them to solo regardless of their skill level. He simply got up there and started to jam with them to see where they were at so he could immediately help. And one gentleman basically played your pentatonic scale kind of up and down like that as his guitar solo. And that's okay because that's all he knew. So the really genius thing that Ron did to help the guy was to limit his options so that he would become more musical. And Ron told him, you can only play this note and this note. And that's it. The gentleman immediately sounded better. He only had 2 notes to choose from, and by doing that, he immediately started doing things like bending or hammer-ons or pull-offs. He started getting more creative rhythmically. It was a real eye-opening experience for me because I saw that you could immediately help anybody, regardless of their skill level, to sound more musical right away. So we don't necessarily have to limit ourselves to 2 notes, but let's take the pentatonic for example. I'll play A minor pentatonic. There is no need to play all of these notes. Why don't I simply choose the inner 4 notes here on the 4th string and the 3rd string? And those are the only notes that I can play when practicing. Let me hit a track. By limiting myself as to what I can play with the number of notes, I'm automatically listening to the music more, and honestly, that is probably the best thing you can do for yourself. If you're listening to the music more, you're better able to choose notes that are harmonizing with the chords that are going by. If we're trying to incorporate all 6 strings all the time, we're definitely not as focused on the music as when we limit ourselves and practice with only 4 notes, for example. And now that we're listening to the music better, we're able to develop our ear quicker and faster and better able to choose those notes that do harmonize. Think about some of your favorite solos. There may be some fast runs that go from point A to point B, and those are impressive, but the notes that you really remember are the ones that are singing and soaring and harmonizing with the chords, and those tend to be those slower ones. Those are the notes that we are striving for in this sort of practice. Another benefit of limiting yourself to maybe only 4 notes, for example, is you become more rhythmic and you start adding space where you didn't typically add space before. It forces us into a situation where we have to think differently in order to sound better because we're using fewer notes. It'll also force you into using techniques like hammer-ons or pull-offs or slides or vibrato. All of those techniques are going to make your notes sound more interesting, and by limiting your focus, you're going to have more time to focus on using those tastefully. So one of the things I've done with my students, for instance, is have them choose a technique to work on, and then we limit ourselves to maybe 4 notes, and they have to use that technique with just those 4 notes. Let me put on a backing track and I'll show you what I mean. So as you saw, I was working on bending there, and some of those notes sound good, some don't sound as good, but you're able to focus on something like that without having your brain thinking about, am I playing every note in a scale? Am I spanning 12 frets so that I sound better and have more register in my playing? No, focus on those small techniques with these limitation practices, and those techniques will actually get better much quicker. Most importantly, make sure you're doing these limitation practices over a backing track. Now, you could play over a drum groove so that you're working on your time feel, but if you get a backing track with a drum groove in there, you're working on your time feel just as much. Plus, it gives you the harmonic context you need so that you know that you're choosing the right notes. Obviously, this limitation practice can be done with any scale. We just use the pentatonic today because it's one of the easiest examples that we all understand. Trust me, this limitation practice really works, and it's going to make you sound more intentional, convicted, and melodic. Make it part of your next practice session and you'll see what I mean. If you enjoyed today's content, please make sure to hit that like button. It really does help my channel, and subscribe if you will. You can also join the Patreon community over at patreon.com/Paul Warren Music. Another cool way to support the channel is if you enjoy these Society of Guitar shirts or Guitar Fanatic shirts, you can click below to get your own. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate you checking out the channel, and we'll see you all next time.